Good day. We're here to discuss emerging cybersecurity threats, how companies are holistically correlating security events and alerts using graph analytics to realize the breakthrough value in their cybersecurity, anti-fraud, and anti-money laundering programs. And we hope to have a lively discussion. Let me first introduce myself. My name is John Swartz. I'm a senior reporter for MarketWatch in the Bay Area. I cover Netflix, Facebook, Google, and previously I had worked at The Independent in London, Barron's in USA Today, as well as Forbes. I'm co-author of a book called Zero Day Threat, which he wrote years ago. Our illustrious panel, Dimitri McKay, Principal Security Strategist and CISO Advisor, Splunk. Uptal Mangla, GM of Industry Edge Cloud at IBM. David Brown, Senior Sales Engineer at TigerGraph, as well as Michael Shaler, Head of Partner Development at TigerGraph. So some of the concepts we're going to go over involve broader threats to enterprises and organized crime rings, the idea that we have more data than ever before, the disparate tools and uncoordinated defense programs that are out there, that risks that go beyond cyber, and many more of the other things. We're going to start first with Dimitri. And Dimitri, your work with Splunk has you talking to CISOs regularly. How true is the statement we hear all the time that cybersecurity threats are always evolving and more complex than ever?
The only thing constant is change, that I can say. But I think the bigger challenge is we in the news, we talk about the big new thing, the big shiny object, but the reality is most breaches are still leveraging old hacks. It's kind of sad that basic security hygiene is what's missing in most organizations. And I say that my source is my role at Splunk is working with customers to mature their security programs. So people, process, and technology. I see hundreds of security programs. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great. So I see across all verticals, and the same thing continues to be. It's a basic security hygiene is one of the biggest things missing.
Hey, can I ask you just a brief follow-up question? When you mention the shiny new objects, are you referring to ransomware in particular? Because I just did a search a couple of days ago and I just come across a slew of examples of ransomware, which seems to be top of mind these days.
Well, if we look at the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, the reality is ransomware is just the easiest way to drive revenue for crooks. It's harder to get into networks today than it was, and the reality is they can make a lot more money exploiting individuals and organizations in mass than one at a time. So I wouldn't say that that's the big evolving thing. It's one of, but as far as shiny new objects, a lot of times it's technology based, and sometimes it's something rearing its ugly head that is irrelevant to the majority of folks. I'll give you an example. The Russia-Ukraine war today. It's relevant to financial, it's relevant to government, it's relevant to manufacturing and utilities. Not so much for local retailers. They're not a target. So that's another thing missing is a lot of folks building programs. They're not doing it based on what is actually a threat to them. It's kind of they're kind of just throwing crap at the wall to see what sticks.
Yeah. So Paul, from a cloud adoption perspective, how has the threat landscape for enterprises changed over the past several years?
Thank you. I would add to the comment that Dimitri just mentioned. So team, as you know, cloud adoption is increasing dramatically globally across all the industries. And companies are moving into a hybrid cloud environment. But in my role from an edge cloud standpoint, let me just give you a data point. Currently, 20% of the data is on the edge. But in the next 3 years, 75% of the data is going to move to the edge. So the definition of cloud just extends into an edge cloud, which creates more risk and vulnerabilities, and is very, very paramount that organizations look at it very seriously. But I want to come back to Dimitri's point. The three things remain unchanged: people, process, and technology. Things may evolve, technology may evolve, tools may come in, new kind of ransomware, new kind of attacks would come in. But if you have strong basics, people, process, and technology, you can handle those risks.
Interesting. I'm going to go to the Tiger Graph guys, David and Michael. We're going to a little bit about your company. You sit in this unique position relative to cybersecurity or connecting data received from different sources to find relationships. Either one of you or both of you, what are you both seeing about the evolution of the cybersecurity landscape?
David, why don't you go first and I'll follow up.
Sure. So the first thing that I'm seeing that is a value with what we can provide and what's happening in the security arena as a whole is many people have numerous products out there. They've got 10, 12, 15 different security tools protecting their environment. The problem is that their staffs are shrinking, the budgets are shrinking, the availability of resources is shrinking. So what they're trying to do is more with less. And to do that, they need to have the controlled visibility. When I say controlled visibility, what I'm talking about is the ability to look at the data across all those different platforms in one location. Where they struggle is when they're trying to do threat hunting, they're trying to do threat research, they're doing incident response, they're jumping from tool to tool to tool to try and track down that threat. What we provide to them with the technology in a graph database environment, we have the ability to bring all of that data together, a little bit different than just a SIEM. We're going to bring together data from your IoT devices, from literally everything out there, similar to what a SIEM is going to do, but we're going to give you deep link analytics. We're going to give you in-database machine learning, a lot of additional functionality and capability to expand on that. By no means are we saying you don't need a SIEM. That's not the case. You absolutely need to continue with all the tools that you have in place today. What we're talking about is to expand it and give you deeper analytics, to give you a quicker response time. You need to bring that information from those disparate systems together, and that's what we can help you with.
And I want to add to that, one of the biggest challenges that ties together a point that Dimitri and Upal made earlier is that we have a people process technology challenge, but we also have a lack of connection or insights into those connections that enables us to actually understand how events are correlated and kind of what the root cause analysis is. And if we're talking about ransomware, how to identify the crime rings that are behind that. This is all about kind of how we draw connections between different disparate events and different vulnerabilities and advanced persistent threats. And that drives a certain level of uncertainty that we can overcome with graph analytics. We can find patterns in the data, and we can find and predict where those patterns may eventually evolve.
Very good. Let's kind of now open it up to more of a kind of a give and take among our panel members. And I'm going to throw out the first question for Dimitri, and feel free to jump in and argue with one another, counteract one another, bring up other questions. But we'll start off with Dimitri and whether some of the leading companies that you've seen or have encountered who are doing what are they doing to better protect themselves against this array of emerging threats and attackers? And when I talk about that, I'm referring to things like ransomware rings, synthetic identity theft, etc.
Well, if we look at across verticals, who the most successful programs are, it's usually financial. They have the best programs because they have the most money, and they have the right amount of money to pay the right people. And as such, they generally have a well-balanced SOC with people process technology. Now, what they're doing, what I've seen is a common organizational structure, and this is also leads back to teams. And product. They're front-ending their security program based on how breaches start. So they're focusing on the beginning of a breach. It's phishing. It's that taking the breach way that most hackers get in. It's looking for at endpoints, because that's where endpoints are they play a part. It's in the beginning of a breach. So they're front ending based on how breaches start, and they're sort of funneling it backwards towards exfiltration. A lot of specialization skill sets. And I see that on the people side. On the product side, that depends on the organizational size. And here's what I mean. If I look at how maturity happens across security programs, low maturity companies buy a ton of products.
Yep.
And they're basically buying features.
Yep.
They're buying products, and as they mature, they realize, we can't solve security with products. And they don't have the people, so they bring on the people. And then once you have people and product, then you can add process. But you can't do it any other way. So we see a really cool consolidation of technology, of them stepping back and saying, why do we have three things that do, to some degree, very much the same thing? A lot of Venn diagrams. And so they do a consolidation. And that's a great place to be. That really helps with maturity, because now having a whole bunch of tools is never the solution. And we're unfortunately we're seeing across cloud vendors that, because companies are using so many different cloud vendors, that they're trying to spread their data across. They're trying to use multiple SIEMs. They're trying to use multiple ML tools, and it's not scalable. But once they start doing consolidation across tool sets, then they can also consolidate where they do education. They can consolidate where they spend their time. And what was mentioned earlier is the volume of alerts that are received. You can't get them from 9 different places. You have to centralize. And so, to answer the question in a very long and roundabout way, the best security programs I see, the ones I've encountered that protect themselves the best, are basically using the tools that work for them as to the fullest extent, with the right people, with specialization. And that's a big one.
So Dimitri, the other day we were talking about this, and you said that XDR is not a thing. I think that's interesting in the context of what you just said. And again, I'm not trying to run down other vendors. I think that it says a lot about kind of where tools fall short on the people and process side. So I'm kind of curious to hear you say more about that, please.
XDR is not a real thing. Okay, so I've been in the SIEM world, as I get comfortable. I've been in the SIEM world for a long time, and I've seen the evolution of SIEM. Yeah. SIEM started, we can go back 15, 20 years. Cisco Mars, that's where it started. And all it did was correlation. It couldn't handle anything else. It was such a small amount of data that it ingested. Then came folks like LogLogic, right, who said, give us everything. And they weren't a correlation engine. They were a log management tool. And then ArcSight looked at that and said, we've got correlation. We need log management. And that's because that's when PCI and HIPAA and SOX kicked in. And so they required companies to keep everything for a minimum of a year. And so SIEM has evolved. If you're a company who doesn't have all the components of a SIEM, what are those components today? You need correlation, you need log management, you need automation, you need case management, and you need ML. I'm gonna call this SIEM 5.0.
Yeah.
Those are the things you need. What's XDR? XDR is a marketing term that was used to describe something that is not all pieces of a SIEM, because they couldn't compete with the SIEMs. They don't have log management. They don't have transparency. They can't do investigations. Compliance is not an option. They're modifying data. So you can't compete XDR against SIEM, because XDR is not a SIEM. It doesn't have enough components for a SIEM. One of my good friends said it's basically SIEM without transparency. And
yes, that's a great way to phrase it. Yes.
But yeah, no, every time somebody asks me about XDR, it's like, it's a marketing term. It's not a real thing. But I see companies running up the flag because it's become popular.
Now, I can't help but ask, but David, kind of, how do you see kind of Graph helping the absence of XDR being real?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, when you think about what a SIEM can do, what your NDR tools, your EDR tools, your firewall tools, all these different tools have rules. those rules allow you to do in-depth analysis and review. Where the disparate tools tend to struggle, and this is where Graph shines, is the ability for you to see and run a query against everything. There's a relatively new term out there of false negatives. False negatives are the ability of a tool to say, there is no problem. I don't see anything that's an issue here. But yet, if it's correlated properly across multiple different tools, you're finding that that event is connected to something that does produce an anomaly, that is actually something of concern, that needs to be identified and rectified. Maybe it's a threat, maybe it's not a threat, but it's not normal. So identifying that information is critical. The other thing is the worn out term of the use or collection of all these alerts. So alert fatigue in and of itself is a very real thing. People have said for years, oh, it's overused. That's, you know, alert fatigue is not something we need to focus on. Well, it is. When you think about the fact that people have fewer analysts, more tools, so they've got to do more training, so that takes them away from doing their tasks, and they're focusing on so many different things. If they could build those rules, drop them into a graph algorithm, run that algorithm across all the data sets that they've got across all those different tools, now I can do the same analytics in a subset of the time, you know, seconds to minutes versus hours and days. Now I've got the capability to truly do event correlation, truly do threat hunting, truly do near real-time incident response.
I mean, David, what you're talking about is just low fidelity versus high fidelity alerting.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
I agree with you. Listen, at the end of the day, people talk about alert fatigue, but they fail to recognize that those alerts they're receiving are probably from their SIEM. That's on purpose. That there's a reason for that. SIEM tools. Okay, so out of the box content in every SIEM, for the most part, is pretty crappy. It's garbage.
Yes.
It's garbage to any company that has a mature program. Where it adds value is companies who have nothing. They literally are starting from zero, right? So it gives them something to look at, but it's all low fidelity. So there's two things happening in the industry, Splunk no different, that I think are critical. Correlation has been promised forever. We've never had true correlation. We didn't have the horsepower, the technology, software. It's hard. Correlation of disparate events from disparate devices is hard. But if we step back for a second and we look at that from how do we go from a low fidelity alert to high fidelity alert? You're right. We have to consolidate these together based on a token. It has to be an asset or an identity or an IP or something. We have to tie them together. So there's that. There's tracking risky activity. And that's to me, that's the high fidelity alerting. You need that if you're going to do automation. Because if you're not going to do true like block and tackle automation until you're confident in your alerts.
Right.
And then the other thing though that's missing in most of the industry, and I'm happy because it's changed, is the majority of content that was coming out wasn't against today's threats. It wasn't against today's threats. Log4j came out, you know, at Splunk and basically everywhere else. We jumped on that. Because we know that we've got tens of thousands of customers who are all going to be doing the exact same thing. Asking two questions. Are we vulnerable? Have we been exploited? The faster we can get that out the door, the faster we can get customers away from doing R&D. And that's the reality. We want to get our customers out of doing R&D work and operations work, because honestly, that truly is the purpose of cloud. Make it easier. You can do the job of reducing risk. That's our business. And so,
yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I think about Uttal's business on the edge and how that's changed, and your comment about high fidelity alerting and correlation is so critical for edge. Uttal, I'd love to hear more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, before I go over there, Michael, I actually just want to make a couple of comments on the discussion. I mean, you've nailed it. The team has nailed it. But at a very high level, the main question that John asked, what are you seeing as best practices, right? I mean, I would just say 3 points. Number one, the clients who are the best are the ones who are constantly, maniacally focused on making sure day in and day out, every minute, every second, they're worried about it, right? So making sure that they have the right skills in their team. There needs to be the right level of skills within the CISO organization, but across all the levels. Number two, we talked a lot about tools. That's critical, right? Paramount. I mean, correlation, ability to, there should never be a threat fatigue, if you will, right? I mean, alert fatigue. I mean, come on, you need to make sure you look at the data and constantly manage it, monitor it. The more you can put in machine learning tools or predictive tools or run models to check, that's exactly what it is, right? And as Dimitri mentioned, looking at real data, current data, latest data. The other thing that I would mention, a lot of the top-notch companies or clients who do it well have a dedicated red team. They make sure security is in their SDLC. Even when they do minor changes on the front end, development, back end, they're constantly making sure it's in their DevOps process, it's in their testing process, it's in the development process. The regression bed that they create for testing, they want to make sure all of the security checks and balances are there, right? So I think it's a mindset which is very, very important. And to your comment, Michael, just a question on edge, with 5G becoming paramount across the globe, businesses are going to either get disrupted or move their businesses into a 5G environment. Everybody's looking at new use cases. Everybody's looking at new business. Everybody's looking at new monetization opportunities across all the industries. And from a 5G standpoint, there's far edge, millions and billions of IoT devices, near edge, and network. I mean, can you imagine how critical security becomes in this? I cannot even start explaining it, right? Because that would require another 1 hour of panel discussion. But just imagine cloud, edge, far edge, near edge, network edge, telcos. I mean, the amount of hacking potential, the amount of for hackers to get inside, it just opens up, right? Big time. So it's very, very important that organizations are ready for this as they move into this B2B monetization opportunity from 5G edge use case standpoint.
Hey, Paul, can I ask you a kind of follow-up? From an industry standpoint, what potential risks do you see? Maybe some edge use cases that need to be covered end to end?
Yeah, a couple of examples. I mean, without naming any clients, let's imagine a manufacturing floor. You need edge on the prem, you need edge at multiple plants and locations. Those edge use cases are looking at customer safety. For example, there are workers working over there. You have edge use cases to look at, predictive maintenance. You have edge use cases to look at worker safety as they go into plants. I mean, imagine if somebody hacks into that and is able to change something, it can totally, it can be not only disastrous, but it can basically bring the entire plant down. Run another use case in the utilities industry or in the telco industry, where you have network towers and you are doing a lot of machine learning and AL modeling on the edge, which is making critical decisions. If you hack into those locations, it can bring the entire network down, right? So just a couple of examples to make it more real.
Okay. Dimitri, this is kind of a follow to what Paul just said, but do you know who your enemy is?
Yeah, I sort of mentioned this earlier, which is understand what you're actually, what could be exploited in your environment and why. So there's really two parts to this. I often ask a question of security teams, and we all kind of nod and smile and laugh, but it's a real problem. I ask, how's your CMDB? Because no one has one. And it's simple. It's a list of what assets are out there in the network and metadata about it. Operating system, what is it running for software? And this is important. It's important because in security, we're seeing a transition from a focus on IT risk to business risk. And so the business value of assets becomes really, really important. A CISO I talked to once, he said, you can't protect it if you don't know it's there.
Yep.
And as a former red teamer, let me tell you, I knew my targets networks better than any of them because that was how I found the targets. Now, if we look at how companies are being hit today from a more of a macro landscape, I go back to the Verizon DBIR. Every year they break down by vertical. These are the things that are being exploited. And it gives some view into, this is probably where you should be putting your chips. If you're building a program in this vertical, these are the things that are being exploited. These are the targets. These are how they're doing it. And work backward from there. So yeah, know your enemy.
And I think the other part is that, your comment about kind of understanding your own assets, having a unified view of your assets with a full dependency graph. I mean, I know we're biased about that one, but I think that what that means is understanding both the network of connectivity that is inside as well as your enemy. That's critical. And that's what I think we have a lot of value to offer the industry with Graph.
That kind of brings me to the question I want to ask Michael. What's the breakthrough business value that Graph Analytics can bring to support the various cybersecurity, anti-fraud, anti-money laundering teams that are fighting this war?
We can detect patterns of behavior that suggest ransomware is just around the corner. As Dimitri said, we have, if we know what the asset is and we know what the patterns of behavior are that are focused on addressing those assets, then we can win. David, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest value that you're going to see when you start using a solution like Graph technology in cybersecurity is a reduction in time to identification. If you look at all the studies that have come out in the past 2 years, 3 years, they all say that the average amount of time it takes you to identify and rectify a threat is anywhere between 190 and 320 days. Okay, if you're letting a bad actor run around your network for that amount of time before you even know what's going on, you're a statistic. There's not a whole lot you can do. Having the ability to proactively identify threats, do ongoing, consistent, automated threat hunting is critical. You have to be proactive about this. If you're waiting until you see an alert to start looking, it's too late. They've already got you. So you need to look at the costs of, let's start running this on a regular basis. Let's look for these threats before they become a major issue. Look at the latest ransomware attacks that are out there. How long were they in those customers' networks before the ransomware was executed? 6, 9, 12, 18 months before they actually executed it. Why? Well, they want to embed it as deep into their backups and everything else to make it that much more difficult for you to get rid of it. So it's not the amount of ransom that you're paying, it's the amount of money you're spending to clean the mess up after you've gotten control of the environment. It's, as I'm sure Dimitri can add to this as a red teamer, it's not about stopping the threat, it's about the cleanup of the mess they made and what you have to do to try and figure out, are there back doors being created? Are there payloads that have been deposited waiting for a future execution date past the one that we've already done to hit you a second time? There's so much you've got to proactively look for. You can't do it manually. Automation is absolutely critical. You
mentioned this time frame. It was 190 or so days, well, more than 300. So that's like a usual scenario or a bad case scenario. What do you with your technology? How soon can you detect? Say sooner than 190 days, obviously, but how much more quickly can you detect a problem?
So I won't put a time frame to it, because
I know
anybody
it's
that
difficult,
does
right?
is looking for trouble. What I'm going to say is we're going to make it much quicker for you to respond and to identify threats, because we're constantly watching, constantly looking. It's near real-time data feeds from those data sources into a single database that allows us to run algorithms on a regular basis. So we're going to cut your time down just astronomically from potentially days, weeks, months to minutes, hours, and days versus what you were doing through a manual process.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you mentioned like the months long detection. I was just thinking, does this winnow down to potentially days or weeks? So that answers the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you think that enterprises are using Graph to their full advantage or their full potential to
No.
create the most? Yeah. And
one of the reasons I came to Tiger Graph, so I came from a cybersecurity company, and we had Graph. We used Graph in our tool. The problem was that we didn't take data from any other sources, so it really only served our purpose and nothing else. I think a lot of companies don't understand the value of Graph. So besides teaching what we can do from a cybersecurity perspective, it's understanding the value of Graph in and of itself. The pre-built, that connected data relationship identification, to put those relationships together, get rid of the restrictions that you had in the old column and row functionality of the old SQL databases, and getting rid of those table joins, and really start working with a true connection of data across, for lack of a different term, a blob of data, and having the ability to see it all and work with it all without the limitations that you have in the older models of databases is significantly more powerful. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't understand that yet. They're starting to hear it, they're starting to understand it, but that's where education opportunities like the new, we have a conference coming up called Graph+AI. We offer the ability to educate people on Graph and how it can help in not just cybersecurity, but in many different areas. And I think industries as a whole are starting to wake up to what the value is. It's just there's more education that's necessary.
I think just to add to David's point, though, is where we're seeing traction fastest and farthest is with anti-fraud, which is a next door neighbor to cybersecurity. Anti-money laundering, anti-fraud. These are key use cases that banks are leveraging to save billions of dollars using Tiger Graph. We have some great stories about that. But where we want to go is we want to move laterally into cybersecurity to add that same values capabilities and that breakthrough business value that says we can turn what used to take months into minutes. And that's where we really start to see connected data adding incredible business value to very, very challenging problems like what Dimitri is outlining, what Utpal is outlining in terms of where we see kind of the best security programs. We're going to take advantage of this. We're going to see the best edge cloud capabilities taking advantage of this as well. So we're excited about that.
Okay. So I'm looking at the clock. We have about 6 minutes left, 6 or 7 minutes. And I wanted to do kind of a round robin and ask you all the same question, if you could answer a couple of minutes each, if possible. What would be your advice for organizations attempting to leverage their connected data to improve their cybersecurity defense?
I'll go first. They need to talk to Dimitri. And they need to build a program. And that's, I think that's a really, really important point, because cybersecurity defenses are primarily a cultural undertaking. Let's be really clear about that. It's not just technology. It's a culture of understanding what the threats are and what your vulnerabilities are and what your stance needs to be. So when companies move to the edge cloud, they need to have a program that's going to leverage that. Dimitri, I put words in your mouth. I hope that I didn't misspeak there.
No, that's fine. The advice I'd give would be centralization, of course. That's our messaging also. It's critical. You need visibility. You can't do anything without visibility. But what I'd say is, and I'm not seeing it enough, measure everything, leverage KPIs, understand what your organization's mean time to detection and resolution and what dispositions look like. Understand that so that you'll understand, if I make a change, is it better or worse? Am I reducing risk or increasing risk? And with that baseline, measure yourself against it on a regular basis. That's how you're going to mature your program.
And go next, team. I mean, sometimes a lot of these things, the basics, you have to make sure you do the basics right. And the basics, I mean, we have mentioned it many times. You need a strong, dedicated program. You need a focus. You need to be maniacally focused on it. It has potential to disrupt and significantly hurt your business. So nothing is more critical. From an executive standpoint, it should be constantly discussed at all levels of the executive leadership. It should be a KPI. There should be SLOs tied to this. There should be SLAs tied to it when you're working with multiple vendors. At executive levels and boardrooms, there should be a topic of constant discussion. How are we doing on security? How are we managing it? Do we have the right tools? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right processes? How can we stay ahead, one step ahead of people who are trying to disrupt our business? So it's a mindset issue. Companies which are maniacally focused on it, which have a surgical focus on it, are always able to be successful. No amount of investment is less, because this is absolutely critical and essential.
And the last thing that I would add to that is education. I think one of the comments and topics that was made early on by Dimitri was actually consolidation of their tools. And a lot of companies that are starting to mature understand they have duplication of services, of features, functions. They need to get away from that. The education needs to be on, how do I improve where I'm at today? What tools do I have? What can I get out of them? Am I using them to their fullest extent? Am I getting the efficiency and the effectiveness that I need to accomplish what is necessary for our organization? And without that education, they're not going to be successful. So kind of in line with what Uptal just said, you have to be focused. You have to really push towards this program. And as Michael said as well, this is really a culture change, and organizations need to undertake it, or they're going to become a statistic.
That's a really good way to end it. Thank you so much for your expertise. This is very interesting and illuminating, I think. I want to thank all of our panelists, and hopefully this was of use to you out in the audience. Wish you a great day and a good conference.